Hello and welcome again to this new series for TCN, Christian Meditation, the Prayer of the Heart. Today we have the wonderful opportunity of having Father Lawrence Freeman, the Director of the World Community for Christian Meditation, join us via this video on the essential teaching. I'm just going to begin by reading a quote here that's on the video cover, and then just letting Father Lawrence take over, because this fills most of our program today. And this beautiful reading by John Maine, the founder of this practice, is that the wonderful beauty of prayer is that the opening of our heart is as natural as the opening of a flower. Enjoy the essential teaching.
John Maine said that every time we meditate, we enter into a great tradition. And it's important for us to see that when we meditate, we are part of a Christian tradition of prayer that John Maine himself rediscovered, of course, and has transmitted to us, adapting it in some ways, rephrasing it in some ways, but presenting it to us as people of a modern era. So I'd like to speak about John Maine's contribution to this tradition and the way he handed it on, and also to look at his essential teaching. What are the essential elements of his passing on of this tradition? The word tradition itself, of course, means a handing on, a transmission. Perhaps it helps to just reflect on John Maine's life itself, because in some ways that's a parable of the spiritual journey that he himself taught. He was born in England in 1926 into an Irish Catholic family. His Catholic tradition was a very living one and very important to him. He served briefly at the end of the Second World War. Then he studied law at Trinity College in Dublin. And then he joined the British diplomatic service, studied Chinese, and was sent out to Malaya, as it then was. And it was when he was working as a diplomat in Malaya, at a time of great social upheaval and violence, that he met an Indian monk who was well known and very well respected among his compatriots as a bringer of peace and as a social activist between the different religious traditions. He met this Indian monk and was immediately impressed by the interiority of this very active, socially active man. And they began to speak about the inner life, about spirituality and about prayer. And eventually the monk asked him, "Are you a religious man, Mr. Maine? Do you pray?" And John Maine replied, yes, he prayed daily. He often went to Mass every day. And his prayer practice was central to his life. And the monk listened to this and said, well, that's wonderful to find a man of the world who is committed to a spiritual practice. And he then began to speak about his own understanding of prayer and described it as the prayer of the heart, or meditation. And as he described this way of meditation, John Maine was intrigued and moved. The monk said to him, when we meditate, we believe that we are entering into the heart where the spirit of the one who creates the universe dwells within us and in silence is loving to all. And John Maine, for him, this was an intuition about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. As they talked more about meditation, the monk described how you make this journey from the mind to the heart by taking a mantra, a sacred word, and repeating this word or phrase continually in the mind and heart until it opens the heart and quietens the mind. So again, John Maine was intrigued and recognized some elements of his own teaching, his own tradition. And he asked the monk, "Could you teach me as a Christian to meditate in this way?" The monk said, "Well, of course, it will make you a better Christian." So John Maine began to meditate under the guidance of this monk, took a Christian word as his mantra, and integrated morning and evening about half an hour of meditation into his other ways of prayer and his daily life. When he returned to Europe, he became a professor of international law at Trinity College again, and eventually, after a few more years, became a Benedictine monk. When he became a monk, he was looking forward to being able to talk about this way of prayer that he had integrated into his life, which had led him even to becoming a monk. But he was disappointed a little when his novice master heard about it and told him that, well, really this isn't a Christian way of prayer, you should give this up. So, in those days, monks were still obedient. So he gave up this way of prayer. Of course, he continued to pray in the other monastic forms that he was being trained in, studied theology, and eventually came back and became a headmaster of a Benedictine school in Washington, D.C. And it was at this time, at a very busy time in his monastic life, dealing with the problems of a large institution and at a difficult period in history in the late 60s, it was then that a young American student came to visit the monastery and asked about Christian mysticism. He'd been to India, he'd been to Japan, he'd been to Korea and so on, and he was interested in meditation, and when he came home he wanted to check out his Christian roots. And John Maine was asked to guide him. And he guided him, first of all, by sending him back to the Desert Fathers. These were the early Christian monks. And it was there in the works of John Cassian, great teacher of St. Benedict, that John Maine recognized or rediscovered the teaching of meditation as a way of Christian prayer, as part of his own historical, theological, spiritual tradition. And in the 10th conference of Cassian in particular, he found the teaching on the mantra, or the formula as Cassian calls it in Latin. And he recognized this as essentially the same teaching as the Jesus prayer of hesychasm in the Orthodox Church. So this was the great awakening or re-coming home of John Maine to his practice of meditation. And within quite a short time, he began to realize that this was an essential aspect of the Christian life of prayer, not only for monks, not only for specialists, but for everyone. And he recognized the growing spiritual hunger among people in our time for deeper inner experience. And so he began to teach meditation, and it became his mission. It became the heart and soul of his monastic service to the world. So in a way he delivered this ancient tradition, which he first discovered through its universal form, but later found, as it were, at home in his own Christian tradition. He delivered this to meet the needs, the spiritual needs of the men and women of our time. An essential element of his teaching on this tradition of prayer is its simplicity. When he speaks about simplicity, he warns us that it isn't easy. So simple does not mean easy. On the other hand, because it is simple, it is available to everybody. Everybody who wishes to enter into it can do so. Let's just take a moment to look at the meaning of this word simple. It comes from the Latin simplex, which was a word used by tailors to describe the way rolls of cloth were folded. And if you folded a roll of cloth many times, it became complex. If you unfolded it so that it had no folds, it was completely open, then it becomes simplex. And that, I think, is a nice image for us to understand what's happening in the simplifying process of meditation. For John Maine, meditation is simple, and the practice of it simplifies us. This is, of course, one of the reasons why children respond to meditation so immediately and so beautifully, because they are more simple than we are, most of us, when we come to meditation. We carry a lot of baggage with us. We have a lot of complexity, emotional, psychological, intellectual baggage. And it's difficult for us to meditate at first, simply because it is simple. But if we can be reassured, and of course encouraged, to understand what simplicity means, then I think it's quite possible for any of us to meditate. The simple practice of meditation in John Maine's teaching, he said, could be written on the back of a postage stamp. He was exaggerating a little maybe, but he believed very much that it's the practice, the simple practice, which is our teacher, which opens us to a depth of experience through which the Spirit is quite obviously forming us, shaping us, and instructing us. And this was his essential teaching. To meditate, we sit down, we close our eyes, we sit still. He suggested the basic rule of posture is to keep your back straight, and then silently, interiorly, to repeat your word, your prayer word, your sacred word, your mantra. And to repeat this word faithfully. That means we keep returning to it when the mind becomes distracted. We repeat it attentively, which means we give it our wholehearted attention. We're not paying attention to any other thoughts or images or ideas. We say the word gently, without using force. Because if we use force, then the ego is trying to take over the process again. And above all, as he said, we say it simply. And this means we're not analyzing what is happening. We're not watching ourselves as we meditate or evaluating our progress. This is one of his key points in his teaching, really, is that when we meditate, we should not try to experience the experience, but to enter into the experience wholeheartedly. Some time ago, I was talking to a small group of people who were interested in starting a meditation group, and most of whom had never meditated before. And after the talk and the meditation, I asked them if they had any questions or comments. And one of them, a businessman who just come from work that day, asked me, how long was the meditation? I said, about 20 minutes. And he said, well, that's amazing. He said, I could have been 20 seconds or 20 hours. He said, I had no sense of time. And he said, this is the first time I've meditated. And amazingly, he said, I went to a place I can't describe. Words really fail me, but I can just say it was a place I'd never been to before, a place of immense peace and joy. And he said, I'd read about this, but I'd never experienced it before. And then he said, what is even more amazing is the fact that I'd had a day which was so bad, I felt so soiled by it, because I was in a rage all day. I couldn't control my temper. I was a really horrible person all day. And so I come here in the evening, I meditate for the first time, and this is what I discover. So we talked about it for a little while. And what it taught me was something that John Maine emphasizes, that meditation is not a technique. It's not a way of twisting God's arm or getting something out of God. Contemplation in the Christian tradition is a grace. It's a gift. It's something we don't earn. It's something we don't buy. It's not the result of an expert mastery of a technique. Meditation is our way of receiving that gift, of opening ourselves to the grace of contemplation. And nothing showed me more clearly, really, than the story of that stressed out businessman, that this gift of contemplation comes to us unexpectedly and unpredictably. Actually, just to finish that story, a few months later I was asking the person who'd started the group if this particular man was meditating with them. And he said yes, he is coming every week. And he's really very grateful to have found this practice, which he's been very faithful to. And I thought that was a wonderful end to the story, because I'm sure he doesn't have that same experience every time he meditates. But he's discovering the fruits of the Spirit in his life, and hopefully finding life can be less stressful and more joyful. This brings us to another aspect of John Maine's teaching, which is about experience. He says it is a way of experience, not a way of theory. And by this he means that we shouldn't be looking for something to happen during the meditation period. We're not looking for an experience of God, or a message, kind of a text message from God, or we're not looking for something to happen. In fact, he even says in meditation, nothing happens. And if it does happen, ignore it. Which is a little challenging, I think, to us at first, because we think, well, if I'm doing this practice, surely something should be happening. And our initial questions are questions like, am I doing it right? What am I getting out of this? Am I wasting my time? And it does take time before these questions begin to calm down, or even to disappear at some point, and we realize that it's in our life as a whole, as John Maine says, that we see the experience unfolding. So we're not looking for experiences specifically, but we're opening ourselves to an inclusive experience that eventually touches every corner, every fiber, atom of our life and our being. And we see the fruits of the Spirit emerging through this faithful, gentle discipline of silence. For John Maine, this practice of meditation is ultimately mysterious. We know in recent years, the last few decades, since John Maine first began teaching meditation, a great deal of medical and scientific research has been done which shows that meditation is good for you, both psychologically, reduces stress, helps you with depression, helps you with anxiety, helps you to sleep better at night, and physically helps you deal with chronic pain, helps your cholesterol and your blood pressure. So we know that all of these benefits of meditation are well tried and tested. John Maine's emphasis, of course, was on the fruits, the spiritual fruits. And for him it was an opening to the mystery of our own being, and the mystery of our being within the being of God. So we can call meditation, as he does, the prayer of being. In meditation, we're not thinking about God, we're not speaking to God, we're not asking God for favors or interventions on our behalf. Those are valid forms of prayer at other times, of course. But in meditation, we are simply being who we are. We're not playing a role, we're not pretending to be better than we are, we're not playing up our sinfulness in order to get God's mercy. We're simply being who we are. And that's why meditation is a shortcut, in a sense, or certainly a direct path to self-knowledge. And John Maine is very much in this tradition of understanding prayer as a way to self-knowledge, because self-knowledge is the basis of our knowledge of God. We cannot know God without knowing ourselves. And this mystery that we enter into is this mystery of knowledge. Be still and know that I am God. And the mystery of knowledge that arises from a way of unknowing. Not by using our mind, our memories, our analysis, our thoughts, or our imagination, All of that is valid, but it's at another time. But this is a way of unknowing, letting go of our familiar horizons and our familiar filters and our familiar preconceptions about reality. John Maine was very much in the tradition that understood the mantra as a way to poverty of spirit. This is exactly how John Cassian describes it, that by the renunciation of all the riches of thought and imagination, we come directly, he says, to the first of the Beatitudes, to poverty of spirit. And that's why in John Maine's teaching there is such an emphasis upon the fidelity to the mantra and the continuous repetition of the word. In recommending us to say the word continuously during the meditation, he's very much in the tradition of Cassian, of the hesychastic tradition, of the Jesus prayer, or the cloud of unknowing. And the reason we say the word continuously is because the word is designed through this discipline not only to calm the mind and to lead us to peace. That man I was telling you about certainly had experienced that, the kingdom of God within us. But ultimately, the mantra, the daily practice of meditation, is to lead us beyond ourselves, ultimately beyond our self-consciousness. The final step, of course, is grace. We can't make that final step by ourselves. But saying the mantra continuously prepares us. It allows us to lay aside our thoughts. Another way of understanding prayer in the spirit of the Desert Fathers and Mothers. By laying aside our thoughts, we eventually can lay aside ourself. So in meditation we are very much putting into practice the teaching of Jesus on prayer. And when he tells us to leave self behind, or no one can be a follower of mine unless he leaves all his possessions, this is something we can experience in the mystery of meditation itself. For John Maine, this mystery is really also the mystery of Christ. For John Maine, all of prayer cannot be reduced to a technique or even a method, he says, because the essential meaning of prayer in the Christian understanding is the prayer of Jesus that is flowing continuously in our hearts. So when we speak about prayer in the Christian understanding, it's not my prayer that we're speaking about, or my experience of prayer. It's more than that. It's about our going beyond ourselves, transcending the ego identity, which would keep us thinking all the time about my experience or my prayer, or what am I getting out of it. We go beyond that ego formula and we move into the prayer of Jesus himself. And this is the heart of John Maine's teaching on meditation as a Christian way of prayer, that we go beyond ourselves into union with the prayer of Christ, and we go through his humanity, with him, in him, and through him, to the Father in the Spirit. And this echoes beautifully the teaching of St. Paul on prayer, when he says, for example, we do not know how to pray. Strange statement when you think of all the different forms of prayer we have. But we do not even know how to pray, but the Spirit prays within us deeper than words. So it's this Christocentric, Christ-centered understanding of prayer and of the purpose of meditation that is really at the heart of John Maine's understanding of meditation. It's for this reason that he understands it as a way of love. In the Christian tradition, we always understand contemplation as the work of love. This is exactly actually how the Cloud of Unknowing refers to it, the work of love. And we can understand this, perhaps very simply, by thinking of the work we have to do to say the word, to say the mantra, the work of attention, because our mind is constantly moving around, jumping from the past to the future, or ending up in long, fantastic conversations or daydreams. So, when we say the word, we are paying attention to the word and laying aside all of those other thoughts. And it isn't very long before we realize that this work of attention is essentially the work of love. And it's not surprising then that in John Maine's teaching we see two great metaphors for understanding meditation. One is the metaphor of relationship, especially relationships of love, in which we expand our awareness and our being beyond our ego centricity, so that we can turn wholeheartedly towards another and give ourselves to the other. And to understand meditation too as a journey, not something that we just achieve overnight or something that we can reduce to an effective technique, but a human journey that actually integrates the whole of our life's journey from birth to death and integrates every part of our being in the process, body, mind and spirit. So let me just end by describing the essential teaching in terms of the practice, as John Maine taught it. For him there are two aspects to the discipline. He liked the word discipline because maybe it's a bit challenging for us today, although many people are quite specifically looking for a discipline, a spiritual practice that they can trust and commit themselves to. For John Maine, the word discipline was a good word to describe meditation because, as he says, it is a learning process. And the word discipline means a learning. It comes from the Latin discere, to learn. So we need discipline to learn anything. But the practice of a discipline also teaches us something deeply and experientially. Through commitment, through overcoming our resistance, and through fidelity. So there are two aspects to this discipline. One is the external discipline, to find a quiet time, a quiet place every day, early morning, early evening. Ideally, the same time, the same place, although it may take time to develop this rhythm of daily meditation. And of course, given the instability of modern life, we have to be very flexible about when and how we meditate and where we meditate sometimes. But basically to see the day as balanced between and with these two moments of silence and stillness and simplicity. John Maine recommended that we commit ourselves to this practice, even if it takes us 10 years before we develop this rhythm, but to keep our eyes on it. And the meditation group, the weekly group, the sense of belonging to a community of fellow pilgrims, all of this is immensely helpful for developing this daily discipline that is so transformative of our daily lives. So that's the external discipline, the daily practice, sitting still, sitting silently. He emphasizes quite strongly the importance of sitting still, not scratching your ear or your nose, and really learning to let go of those physical fidgets and distractions as well. And then, of course, there is the interior discipline, the discipline of reciting the word faithfully, attentively, gently and simply, letting go of thoughts as they arise, letting go of our self-analysis. These two aspects of the discipline are very liberating. For John Maine, discipline was a way to liberty of spirit. And to discover that, to discover the fruitfulness and the liberating power of this discipline is one of the great discoveries of my own life, and I think a great discovery that awaits anyone who just begins this journey. As John Maine often encourages us by saying, all you have to do is to begin and keep on beginning, and everything you need to complete the journey will be given to you. And I can only say that has been my experience over the years.